I'm Robert Winston and I work at Imperial College just across the way, and I'm currently Professor of Science and Society, though I am really by training a medic and a bit of a biologist. I don't remember the first time I visited the Natural History Museum, but I would have been about 7, so we're talking about the years immediately after the war. At that time of life, there were 3 museums on the South Kensington site which were particularly attractive to me, and one clearly was the Natural History Museum, which I used to visit, and then quite often I go next door to the Science Museum or to the Geology Museum, which was then a separate museum. And actually, geology is now part of this museum, and I have to say that the geological specimens were actually very important. I bought myself a geological hammer. I went out and tried to look for specimens of fossils in cliffs and so on, and also to look for different stones when I was a 13 or 14-year-old. And for a long time, I thought I might be a geologist. I think that the wonderful open hall with the monster dinosaur was the thing that, wowed me as a 7-year-old. Even looking at that skeleton of this sort of semi-aquatic animal, you get a feeling of the immense bulk. All of that was fascinating to me as somebody who was interested in sort of how things worked. As a kid, this always amazed me, the blue whale. It was difficult to believe that there could be an animal this size in the sea. It is the most extraordinary model to think there are still a number of these animals around that actually might meet each other and occasionally mate. If you go along the corridor with all the fossilized bones of fish, for example, it's an amazing display which I think any child would find quite extraordinary. I remember my whole family were absolutely engaged by the possibility that Piltdown Man might have been a fraud. It wasn't an entirely bad thing because, of course, it actually stimulated young people like me to think more seriously about anthropology and about human anatomy and about what you could learn from looking at bones. It did start me thinking about the nature of fossilized humans, and I've retained that interest, and it's actually something which has fed my writing, and it's certainly fed my television programs. So, for example, The Human Mind, The Human Body, Human Instinct, to some extent, are based on those ideas of hominid physiology. One of the things that the Natural History Museum collection shows so clearly is how, although we are relatively closely related to the chimpanzee, how remarkable was that expansion of the cranium, of the brain. So in Australopithecus you've got a brain size of about 450 millilitres, a bottle of milk. And then in the modern man, you've got this massive brain size, 3 times that size. And somehow the collection here gives you a dynamic understanding. I think perhaps what the Natural History Museum is doing particularly well is demonstrating the close relationship of what you see in this museum with the changes which are now happening across the globe in terms of climate change and the serious consequences that will have. And I think that's something which young people are turned on by, are engaged by, and recognize, perhaps through this museum, why that's very important.